What's up, gamers? DreamcastGuy here, and today I want to talk about the video game industry because it feels like something extremely bad is happening. It feels like gamers are upset. It feels like every single big AAA project is an abysmal failure. Console sales are down. It just feels like something is very much amiss. But the specific reason I wanted to discuss it today is because I keep seeing this question kind of floating across the internet. Why is every video game a failure? Like, statistically, we can look at the math. Video games are a trillion-dollar industry, not just billion. They actually generate trillions of dollars across every platform, every ecosystem, every company. But if you look at the actual sales numbers of specific projects, something bad is happening. Consider the fact that just Ubisoft used to make $13 billion a year. They made $13 billion in a single year a couple years back, and now they've made $1 billion. How did they lose over 90% of their market in just such a short time frame? Let's talk about the state of video games and why it feels like everybody is so upset and unsatisfied by current gaming in 2024 and kind of talk about how it can be fixed. Hi, hope you're having a great day, and if you could please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already. So we're going to look at a bunch of different stuff today because this is a topic that I think needs to be solved. It needs actually to have somebody in the industry kind of crack the case. So I kind of would just spitball about it because when I see headlines like this, I must admit they're very shocking to me. The Until Dawn remake came out a couple weeks back, and apparently it sold less copies than Concord. Now, the reason this is just so shocking is that, we know for a fact that Concord is the biggest PlayStation failure of all time. It sounds like they lost, literally, I think the rough math is about $250 million was lost making Concord, a game that was actually shut off after less than 2 weeks. And so people are saying, how is it that Until Dawn sold less than that? Or I think about things like the crazy raw digits are starting to come out for Star Wars Outlaws. It sold 1 million copies. Now that's kind of insane because in the past, brand recognition, I think, used to be a lot more powerful. Obviously, I was born in the 80s, I grew up in the 90s, and it did feel like we used to get tons of movie tie-in games and, all sorts of silly cartoon tie-in games. You could get an X-Files game, or you could play Roger Rabbit's Big Egg Hunt. There was tons and tons and tons of games that would sell at least mediocrely well because of the brand recognition. You could make an X-Men game, and it would sell at least enough to make your money back just because people wanted to press X to punch as Wolverine, right? Well, nowadays, it feels like brand recognition doesn't really carry that weight. This is one that just truly shocked me because Star Wars Outlaws seemed like it would at least be a pretty big success. It would at least make its money back, right? This is Star Wars. It's an official part of the universe. They made new planets, but everybody just said, screw that. It didn't have the best review scores. I'm one of the people, I did genuinely enjoy Star Wars Outlaws. I'd probably give it a 7.5 out of 10. It had too much stealth, but I had fun with it because I like the fact that it didn't have Jedi everywhere, but personal preferences aside, it's interesting that even big games like this that are incredibly pricey, that are marketed like crazy, my God, they bought so much ad space for this, and yet that just doesn't activate people in the way it used to do. I also do think there is a big problem with budgeting in general. The fact that it costs, practically $250 million to make a AAA game now, that's prohibitively expensive, even if your game is actually a success. Even stuff like FF16. This game got crazy good review scores. It is so top-notch. I'm a massive fan of Final Fantasy. It's my favorite series of all time. It's Resident Evil and Final Fantasy. And when I see this game, you can't help but just kind of acknowledge the fact that this is probably over budget. Square Enix themselves admitted that they have not made their money back on FF16 or on the Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It sounds like Remake was also just not profitable enough. And it's crazy to think that these games are good. In my opinion, undeniably, they are good and they're well marketed, but people aren't buying them. People aren't engaged by them in the way that they used to be. And I almost think that part of that comes down to the fact that video games used to have this rawness to it. I have played every generation of games, pretty much literally everything from Atari all the way up. I have owned and played pretty much every single console ever produced. If you can think of the console, I've owned it, I've played it. And when I say that, I bring that up not as like some cheesy retro brag, but instead the fact that if you've played every era of gaming, there has definitely been a very recent pivot that I feel like gamers are kind of having trouble trying to put into words. When you played something like Metal Gear Solid back in the day, or some random weird RPG you picked up the shelf, like Tactics Ogre, Let Us Cling Together. These games were not just fun, they weren't just cool with great stories and crazy in-depth worlds, they had this rawness to it. Not every weapon is perfectly balanced. Not every voice line is perfectly read. Sometimes you'll run into some game-breaking bugs. But that rawness, I think, helped them put these games out quicker. A lot of times these games came out back-to-back. Dev times used to be a lot shorter, even for, in their own time, very high-budget projects like Gears of War or Uncharted. The fact that we got an entire Gears of War trilogy on a single console. The fact that we got Uncharted 1, 2, and 3, an entire trilogy on a single console. I almost feel like the biggest problem now is that not only do games take longer, I feel like they're obsessed with polish and market testing groups and stuff like that. And people are beginning to give in my opinion, a very well-deserved pushback. I was thinking about this because this year has been crazy for Atlas. These are every Atlas game that was released just in 2024. So literally, in the last 10 months alone, they released Metaphor, which sold 1 million copies in the first day, which is still absolutely insane. Persona 5 Tactica, Unicorn Overlord, which I love, love, love. Holy heck, you got to play that game. Shin Megami 5 Vengeance, Persona 3 Reload, which is a very good remake. Now, granted, both of these down here are like remake, remaster kind of projects, right? But still, the fact that Atlas, in just this year, released 3 completely new games, it's impressive because these are AA. These are not AAA, they're not going to have photorealistic graphics, and a lot of people are talking about the fact that these games honestly have a different vibe than other things released today. I feel like other things are having that as well. I think the huge love for things like Black Myth Wukong, or obviously Space Marine 2, games that are not trying to be perfect, they're not trying to be well balanced, they're trying to be fun, and they're trying to be just a good time, right? I was thinking about this right here. This is one of the people that worked on Baldur's Gate 3, which in my opinion is one of the best games of all time. And he said this: Metaphor is the first game I've played in years that captures the magic of a mainline Final Fantasy. The high concept themes, tight flowing turn-based combat, and absolutely god-tier music pull you in with no remorse. It's not the same, but it makes me feel the same. This, in my opinion, is a deeply fascinating quote. Not only because this guy works in game dev, so he has like more of an insight of all the ins and outs of how stuff is getting all cobbled together, but I love this term. It's not the same, but it makes me feel the same. I think this is what video games are missing the most, is that sense of feeling. Now, obviously, 16 is still a good game. 16 is still filled with a lot of very good feeling. FF7 Rebirth is filled with a lot of feeling, but I think that a lot of games now, even games that personally I've had a lot of enjoyment with, the stuff that has the highest budget seems to have that less raw feeling to it. It feels almost sanded down. It's art by committee. I saw a quote that was going around. I can't remember who it's from, so I'm going to say quotes like this. You can know it's a good joke, but it's not my joke. Somebody said, "Every character in Spider-Man 2 talks like HR is in the room." And I love this quote, and I keep thinking about it because it is a specific tone that a lot of video games have now that is just so kind of off-putting, right? Every character in Spider-Man talks like their grandma is right there, or their boss's boss is right there. Everything's got to be the most carefully worded joke. Even the playful ribbing. Nobody's ever rude. Even the bad guys kind of have a heart. And I like Spider-Man 2 a lot. I'm a big fan of Spider-Man 2, but there is that weirdness that every character, even when they're trying to like flirt with a girl and stuff, they have this really weird, sanitized Disney tone to everything to it that I just feel like is unnecessary, right? I just feel like a lot of games have this weird fear of like pissing off the gamers or pissing off somebody. So they're trying to make the cleanest, safest project possible, which I think innately in our core is off-putting to gamers, where it's not like I want a game to be, super edgy and goofy or whatever, but I kind of miss when games were a little bit clunky, right? I mean, some of the games that I feel like blew my mind the most, like first playthrough melted my brain the most, were things like Elder Scrolls 4 Oblivion. My buddy got an Xbox 360 shortly after launch, and I remember him playing that, and I was watching at his house as he was having those really cheesy dialogue and glitchy faces and all the crazy quest lines that would do twists and turns you didn't expect. Oblivion is a very good game, but I almost feel like when you're playing that, it definitely feels like there is a raw vision they're trying to convey, even though they're having to tape it together at times, right? I saw these tweets here by Night Sky Prince. Now, I want to end the video with this. I've got 4 tweets I want to show of his that I feel like he has kind of nailed the problem with gaming and why stuff like metaphor is the future of video games. Now, before we move on, I did do a big video yesterday talking about metaphor. I love it. I'm about 25 hours into it now, which I've heard the game is a little over 80 hours long, so the fact that I'm not even halfway through it to me is kind of insane. Metaphor is a good game, but I feel like a lot of people playing it are kind of going, wow, it's crazy how retro and cutting edge this can feel. But he talked about this. The erasure of AA games is so real that most people don't even know there's a type of game that exists between Animal Well and Cyberpunk. Now, if you haven't played Animal Well, this is like one of the highest rated indie games of the year. And this is a great point. There used to be hundreds of thousands of games, literally, that were between indie and AAA. You used to have games that were like 8 hours long, 10 hours long, and yeah, sometimes they'd be goofy or have an overly ham-fisted plot twist ending or, stuff like that. But they would still find an audience because the production was so cheap that if it sold at all, even 100,000 copies of it got sold, that would be enough to make another sequel, right? Whereas now there's so many games that try to be either the cheapest indie with like the smallest dev team, so cheap that they can't even fix patches because patches cost money and stuff like that. Yes, that's actually happened. Or there's AAA stuff that costs like $250 million to put something out, and there's kind of lost that middle ground. Now, I saw people just trying to give him pushback, and no offense to this gentleman, but my God, is he wrong. You're really trying to force the narrative when you say Metaphor and Reload and Infinite Wealth aren't AAA, framing it like that because they aren't high-fidelity exclusives with crazy marketing is disingenuous. This person is wrong. No offense, this person is, they just have no idea what they're talking about. They're being dumb. They just don't know what the hell they're talking about. But he responded and said, brother, Metaphor and Reload, as well as most Atlas games, primarily use visual novel style scenes without full voice acting. These games by design are cost effective AA. Go and compare that to God of War or Spider-Man. AA does not mean no money was spent. And this is a great point. He does bring up the fact that a lot of these projects have sometimes 1,000 developers. The average team has like 200 to 500 people working on them. Games like Cyberpunk, Assassin's Creed have 1,000 people doing it. The video game industry is having a couple main problems at once. Slow production times, projects not coming out even after spending like 5 years in development. They still feel feature incomplete. But I feel like the biggest issue to me is the fact that it does seem like we have lost a little bit of that PlayStation 2 vibe. I recently started playing a bunch of PlayStation 1 again in my free time, right? Just old stuff. I modded up PlayStation Classic. And whenever you're playing really old school games, right? The old Resident Evils, real clunky, goofy games. They don't have the best voice acting. They don't have very good graphics and stuff like that. But I will always die on the hill that they have passion, that they have a specific vision they're trying to convey with you. And even if they fail, it's damn more interesting than a lot of stuff that's coming out today, because I feel like a lot of games today are afraid to make a point. I'm going to say it. Metaphor makes a damn good point, and I kind of appreciate the fact that that game, as clunky as it can be, as as overly obtuse as those plot points can be, I think people appreciate the fact that it's a game that has a specific vision, and they nail it with good combat and really good characters. This guy Stoll is my favorite of all of them. A voiced protagonist for the first time in an Atlas game. It's a really good game that even if you don't, care for every single part of it, at least it has that love, that passion, that rawness that I think of a lot of us kind of miss. But these are just some off-the-cuff thoughts. I don't know why I'm rambling like that, but hi, hope you're having a good day. If you could, please give this video a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and please keep dreaming. Also, buy Metaphor, buy Unicorn Overlord, buy Shin Megami Tensei 5 Vengeance if you haven't played it already. All these games are so good. I've literally bought and played every single game on this list, and I haven't beaten Persona 5 Tactica or Reload. I think I'm on the last boss of Unicorn Overlord, and I got to finish that. But Atlas, my God, brothers, my God. Thanks so much for watching that video. If you want to see something else, you can always click this link to see what I put up last, or, subscribe and see what's coming up next. Also, I promise that whatever I do, it'll try not to suck.